Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says interstate boundary issue creating bad blood. The article here is focusing on the border dispute between the states of Andhra Pradesh and Odisha. Before we understand what this article is all about, let's have a brief idea with respect to the background. Before 1947, India was under the control of the British Empire. One of the important provinces for the British Empire happens to be Bengal. But Bengal also had issues for the British Empire. Why? Because this was a huge province. They were not able to control it. They had to increase the administrative efficiency as well, which is why Bengal was broken down into Bengal and Bihar and Orissa province. So kindly remember, Bihar and Orissa province was one single province which was broken down back in the year 1912 on 22nd of March. After this step was initiated by the British, they again felt that Bihar and Orissa province, which happens to be a single province, was again not controllable. Again, the administrative efficiency was dropping as well. They wanted to improvise on the efficiency as well. They wanted to have better schemes and mechanisms to be implemented so that the people do not oppose the British Empire, which is why once again back on April 1st, 1936, Bihar and Odisha province, which was present back then, was broken down and Bihar became a separate province and Odisha became a separate province on April 1st, 1936. So on April 1st, 1936, what we have is the creation of a new province called as Orissa. Do remember the original name was Orissa and only in the year 2011 Orissa became what is called as Odisha. So what is the focus right now? The focus right now is that the British Empire released what is called as the Constitution of Orissa Order of 1936, which means to say that there is one of the important panchayats called as the Kotia Panchayat. This Kotia Panchayat was part of the Jaipur estate and this Jaipur estate was part of Orissa province. But something else was happening in the year 1942. What was it? We have what is called as the Madras province. Kindly remember, we had Madras as a province, but we did not have a separate state called as Andhra Pradesh. Why? Andhra Pradesh as a state was created only in the 1955s and the 56. So what do the British do? There were certain parts which were part of the now Andhra Pradesh, which was merged with certain parts of Odisha. This happened before independence, but Madras constituency or the Madras province were not happy with it. That is where there was a joint survey conducted of Odisha, Bihar and Madhya Pradesh. So Kotia, which had about 28 villages, it was broken down into 21 villages and 7 villages. These 7 villages of the Kotia Panchayat were paying all the revenue taxes to the Odisha government. But there were about 21 villages which were not paying any revenue taxes to the Odisha government. So remember, there are about 21 villages which did not pay any of the revenue taxes to the Odisha government. After 1955 and 56, we have the creation of Andhra Pradesh as well. And after 56 up until 64, there was no dispute whatsoever about these hanging 21 villages. So these 21 villages was completely left out. They were not part of either Andhra Pradesh. They were not part of either Odisha as well. This is where there was a problem for these particular villages. But in 1964, what exactly happened? Andhra Pradesh as a state was trying to get a hold on these disputed 21 villages, which is where Odisha as a state immediately goes to the Supreme Court of India in the 1980s. Why did the Andhra Pradesh government look at taking up these 21 villages into the fold of Andhra Pradesh? That is because this particular area was a Maoist hotbed, but this particular area was also known for its mineral resources. It had gold, it had platinum, it had manganese, bauxite, graphite, limestone, so on and so forth. So because they discovered something in this particular area, which is why Andhra Pradesh wanted these 21 villages to be under the fold of Andhra Pradesh. But Odisha had control over these 7 villages, but they were not actively participant when it comes to the 21 villages. But after this issue came into picture, Odisha approaches the Supreme Court of India in 1980s. In the 1988, the Supreme Court passed an interim order maintaining the status quo, which means the future decision of these 21 villages will have to be decided in the future. But as of now, in 1988, whatever is the dispute, it remains status quo. So those 21 villages were not part of Odisha, they were not part of Andhra Pradesh as well. Again, in the year 2006, the Supreme Court came up with an injunction order. What is this injunction order? This meant that the Supreme Court clearly said that we would not be passing any judgment. Why? Because this is not for us to pass this particular judgment, as this is under the realm of the legislature. So you, the state government, will have to enter into a consensus. You have to speak to the legislature, which has to be the parliament. So the Supreme Court has clearly said that in 2006 that these 21 villages, which are a dispute between Andhra Pradesh and Odisha, will be sorted out only with the presence of the central government, which happens to be the central legislature. So the Supreme Court did not look into this particular issue. But in the present scenario, what is the dispute? The dispute is that there is a status quo. The 21 villages is yet to be sorted out, but Andhra Pradesh in the present scenario has picked up nearly 3 villages and it is conducting elections in the panchayat. And as a result, we have the Odisha government, which has gone to the Supreme Court of India, and it has asked the Supreme Court of India to issue contempt orders against Andhra Pradesh. Why? Because it has violated the orders that have been established by the Supreme Court. That is what this controversy all about. But our major focus would be with reference to what is called as the concerns. What are these concerns? When you look at this particular dispute, that is Koraput district, which happens to be in Odisha, and that is where this particular Kotiar dispute is, which is a border area between Andhra Pradesh and Odisha. What exactly happens? Let's say there are villages, let's say about 21 villages or any number of villages which are currently not sorted out. What would happen to the people in this particular region? There is on one side Odisha, which wants to develop. On the other side, there is Andhra Pradesh, which also wants to develop, but neither of them might develop this particular place. Why? It is yet to be sorted out. And whenever there is a government scheme and program, let's say for example the public distribution system or providing of rations, who would provide these rations to the people of that particular area? Is it the government of Odisha or is it the government of Andhra Pradesh? So all the schemes and programs, the public distribution system and according of the ration will be a major problem. And at the same time, villagers also have voting rights as well. If they are not able to prove the domicile of that particular state, whom will they cast their vote to? So problem is that people would not be able to be beneficiaries of the schemes of the government, and sometimes they may also miss out on their political rights of voting as well. This is one side of the story. Now imagine both the states are wanting to convince this particular border region and its villages. So what will happen? The state of Andhra Pradesh would also mean that they would want to convince the people of this particular region, and at the same time the state of Odisha would also want to provide new schemes and programs as well. So this means that this particular region's people would be beneficiaries of both the state of Andhra Pradesh as well as the state of Odisha as well, which means the other regions, other districts are not able to get these PDSs, but because there are few natural resources, everything is going to the people of this particular Kotia Panchayat, which currently has dispute in about 21 villages. So it is these disputes and consequences which are being borne to the people of this very region. So what is that we have to understand? There are regions that are present, there are conflicts that are present, but the major one right now is between the state of Andhra Pradesh and Odisha. When you look into these states, currently we have West Bengal, which is a border state, we have Jharkhand, which is a border state, we have Chhattisgarh, which is a border state. There are about 30 districts in the state of Odisha, but there are 14 districts which are in the border areas. Out of these 14 districts, there are 8 districts which has border disputes with West Bengal, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh and all these states. So this can also be important from your preliminary examination, where they might ask you a question, which are the border states with Odisha. So do remember, it is West Bengal, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh and Andhra Pradesh. So in the present scenario, there are multiple issues that are surfacing with Odisha and its border states, but the major one happens to be Kotia, which we have currently discussed. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says fuzzy law, unclear jurisprudence, trampled rights. The other articles, when Twitter was in right. Both these articles are speaking about the Twitter and the government issue. The background to this particular issue has been explained on 5th of February 2021. On the discussion of 5th of February 2021, we did discuss and we gave you arguments as to why the government was right and Twitter, being a private company, had to comply by the rules of the government. But in the present scenario, we will look at an alternative narrative which says that Twitter is right, that Twitter rules are right, but government, when it is sanctioning particular order under 69A of the Information Act, is very ambiguous. So what should be the way forward is what are these two articles all about. Let's try and understand the arguments put forward by both the authors. On February 1st, 2021, what did we see? There were increasing cases of farmer protest. There were increasing cases of farmer protest on one side. There were people who were also trying to support the farmers by using what is called as the social media platform. The social media platform in the present scenario happens to be Twitter. So what exactly happens? There was a hashtag that genocide against farmers are being taken, and as a result the government issues an order. This order asks Twitter to ban certain users, block certain websites. Why? Because it is instigating violence, provoking people to take arms against the government, which is why the government came up with an order and Twitter initially followed these orders. But after some time, what did Twitter do? Twitter revoked this particular order and unilaterally took a decision of opening up these users and to their accessibility, which is where the government said that you, the Twitter, since you have taken the decision on your own on an unilateral basis, you are supposed to be penalized. Why? Because you are not respecting the law of the land, which means the government has gone on to say that since Twitter has not respected the laws of the land, it has violated certain sections of this particular act, it has to be penalized, says the government of India. The author in the present scenario has gone on to say such an act is not good for the Indian democracy. Why? When it comes to section 69A, it basically is about censorship, and this has been employed by the government of India as a costless option. Ideally, they should have gone through the court of law, and if the court of law feels that this is a violation, that is when the government of India should penalize it. But even before the court of law doing it, if the government does initiate a penal provision, that is where the freedom of expression and its mandate will be violated, says the author. And at the same time, section 69A of the IT Act does not have any procedural safeguard. Since it does not have the procedural safeguard, it is not listening to the affected parties. Who are the affected parties? The people who are present, the Twitter which is present. So ideally this means it is violating the natural justice principle as well. What does natural justice principle says? That if there are two parties, both the parties will have to be heard by the court of law or the person passing the judgment. But since it is driving only the narrative of the government, the other affected parties' viewpoints are not taken into picture. So there is lack of procedural safeguard for the affected parties. And finally, we did discuss in our last week's CNA that when it comes to Shreya Singh's case, it struck down what is called as 66A of the IT Act, but it kept what is called as the 69A of the IT Act because it felt that there are already enough safeguards so that the government can apply this particular section. While giving this particular judgment, this particular Supreme Court judgment also said that whenever an intermediary or a particular service provider is asked to stop a particular information from reaching the public, they also have to release what is called as the blocking order. What is this blocking order? Basically, the government is saying to the people what are the reasons why internet is suspended, or what are the reasons why intermediary is not letting certain section of the people to use that particular platform. But in the present scenario, the government has not given any of the blocking orders, which means the government is violating some of the very principles of due process, says the author. So in this particular backdrop, the author goes on to suggest some of the way forward steps. What are these steps? Let's say, for example, in most of the cases, yes, the government and the executive have every power to issue orders to the intermediary. But the author goes on to say that this has to be defined and can be used only in the narrow premises, not for everything, not for the application in general parlance, but there are certain exceptional cases, let's say external aggression, or it is to do with sovereignty of India, and in very few cases is where the government can invoke this particular provision, or else it has to be rooted through the court. If the court gives the permission, if the judiciary says yes, this is a violation, that is when it has to be applied, says the author. So the executive should be using this section of 69A in a narrow premise, says the author. And at the same time, as we discussed, when it comes to the Share Single Court and also in the internet case of Kashmir as well, the Supreme Court did come up with an argument that blocking orders have to be made public, but the government is not releasing the blocking orders, which is where that people do not know why it is blocked and they are not able to head to the courts of law, which means their rights is getting violated. So the author goes on to conclude that whenever the government is taking up such a position, it has to release the blocking order, so that in case there is any grave violations, the people can pick up this blocking order, head to the court of law, ask the court that, dear court, that there is a violation, please provide justice to us. So it is this that is very important, says the author. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about the Yemen war crisis. We have what is called as the Tunisian Revolution. This is also called as the Jasmine Revolution. What is it? It is a civil resistance movement which happened in Tunisia. It happens to be one of the countries in Africa. What exactly happened? There was a lot of job crisis. There was unemployment crisis. Inflation rate were increasing, and there was no respect for democracy and the rights of the people as well. The governments were not accountable to the people. There was excessive corruption in the system, and people were not happy about the government and its protocols and its implementation, and felt that government was not working for the welfare of the people, which is where people went against the government in the country of Tunisia, and this spread to other countries of Arab as well, which is also called as Arab Spring. So once it started spreading to the Arabic countries, one of the countries where this particular spillover effect was felt was in the country of Yemen. So what exactly happened in the country of Yemen? Once again, there was large scale corruption. Government was not working for the welfare of the people. There was inflated prices as well, and people were not getting affordable fooding, and government was not even accountable to the people, which is where the people started questioning the government, and they asked for the resignation of then Yemeni president Ali Abdullah Saleh. This happened in the year 2011 and 12. After the president Abdullah Saleh resigned, we have the new president called as Mansour Hadi. But Mansour Hadi, after he became the president, had to deal with a variety of problems. He had continuing loyalty of many military officers to Abdullah Saleh. They were not letting him work, and there was increasing cases of corruption as well, which he was not able to keep a check on. There was large scale unemployment crisis as well, and at the same time there was food insecurity. So again, people were not happy with the presidency of Mansour Hadi. But something else was happening in Yemen, that is Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and Houthi militants were again opposing to the administration of Mansour Hadi. So what do we actually see? Tunisian revolution. This has a spillover. It enters the fold of Yemen. Yemen, the president resigns. There is new president. But there are certain extremist organizations and some terrorist organizations who are also opposing the administration of Mansour Hadi. This is where there were a particular group called as Houthis. Who are these Houthis? They other to a branch of Shia Islam known as Zaydism. But this particular group or the militant organization was indirectly being supported by Iran. So what exactly happens? There is a particular hegemony that happens in the Arabian Peninsula. On one side, there is Saudi Arabia. On the other side, there are sectarian divides when it comes to Islam. So each of these countries wants to dominate in the Arabian Peninsula, and as a result, this particular country of Saudi Arabia feels that Iran is supporting Houthi militants, and as a result, it would be close by to its neighboring country and they will seize all the power, and Saudi Arabia feels that it would not be able to control its neighboring region. And as a result, what we see is Saudi Arabia entering indirectly into the Yemen crisis. Why does Saudi Arabia enter? One is because we have the President Hadi who seeks the support of Saudi government. Why? Because we have the Houthi militants who happen to control the capital Sana'a when it comes to the Yemen crisis, which is where Saudi Arabia enters the Yemen crisis, and this becomes a grave catastrophic human right violations as well. Why? Saudi Arabia and Iran are both fighting in Yemen for control and hegemony of this particular region. Saudi Arabia feels in case the Houthis do control this particular region, they will lose out on the control in their own backyard, and at the same time the Houthis are supported by Iran, and this is leading to bombing in this particular place. People are losing their lives, and ultimately this Saudis claimed were fighting on the behalf of the established government, but at the same time what we actually witness is grave violation of human rights. So what exactly happens? Thousands of people were killed, tens of thousands were displaced, and about two-thirds of the country's 28 million people do not have enough to eat. Why? Because Saudi Arabia and Iran are fighting in Yemen, which happens to be a grave violation. This particular Yemen war was indirectly supported by the presidency of Barack Obama. The same was also espoused by Donald Trump as well. And now we have Joe Biden, who is the president of United States of America, who goes on to say that you, the Saudi Arabia, will not be part of Yemen. So what has he said? The Biden administration has said that it wants to end all the support to Saudi Arabia as a signal of restoring peace in the Yemen crisis. So what are the changes introduced? Because Joe Biden administration has called for peace and truce in Yemen, what we actually see is large amount of changes when it comes to the operations of Saudi Arabia. Back in 2017, Saudi Arabia and Qatar did not have much of good relationship. They did not have good relationship from 2017, and now Saudi and Qatar have restored their ties as well. Back in 2017, Qatar was getting closer to Iran, and at the same time it is said that it was also supporting some of the extremist group. So Saudi Arabia had pushed Qatar out of its bonhomie, and now these two countries have come together and they have plans of restoring. And apart from this, because of the call of the Joe Biden administration, human rights will also be restored, said Saudi Arabian administration. But what we have to wait and watch is that Saudi Arabia will have to be completely out of this Yemen war, and Mr. Biden will have to push Saudi Arabia and its allies to end the blockade in Yemen, and it also has to speak to the alternative parties who are present in Yemen so that peace is restored in Yemen. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says opening up the vaccine market. The article here is focusing on the administration of vaccines. We have two important vaccines. One is Covishield, the other is Covaxin. Both these vaccines are indigenously developed and they are being administered to the people of India. When you look into the statistics, first dose of vaccine is being administered to about 8 million people, which means that it stands at 0.6% of the population. Seroprevalence survey suggests that there are about 400 million people who have developed antibodies to this particular virus of COVID-19. So what do we have is that we have natural one, that is the antibody development against the COVID-19, and the artificial one where vaccines have been given to the people of India. But when we have to develop herd immunity in the country of India, 60% of the population will have to develop antibodies. It can be either directly or through the natural process or indirectly by the introduction production of the vaccine, which means that nearly 780 million people will require what is called as the antibody production. But what is the population of India? It is 1.3 billion. And if 400 million have already developed what is called as the antibody, and what we require is 780 million, if you subtract this from this, there is fall in the number to nearly 380 million, which means these 380 million people do not have the naturally produced antibodies, and at the same time they do not have the vaccine as well. If the government continues to give these vaccines, which is in the form of Covishield and Covaxin, it will take at least 47 months, which means it is nearly 4 years for the government to fulfill this particular criteria. And as a result, this particular process will not be effective, says the author. In order to overcome this particular issue, what we require is an alternative pattern of what is called as the market vaccination. What do we mean by it? As of now, we have two indigenous manufactured vaccines. Apart from this, we also have Pfizer, we also have Moderna Tata, which are in discussions. We also have Sputnik 5. We also have Johnson and Johnson, which has developed one dose of vaccine as well. We have the regulator in India as well. In case there is the vaccine development, it is able to meet all the criteria set by the regulator. It is able to prove its efficiency and there are no side effects. In such a scenario, we can come up with an alternative where we not only use Covishield and Covaxin. If they are able to meet the safety parameters, all this will also have to be accepted and released in the market, says this particular author and the suggestion. So what is the way forward? As of now, we only have two options. So in the near future, all these market forces, irrespective of their cost, if they are able to meet the safe standards and if they are meeting all the criteria set by the drug regulator, they should also be released in the market by the drug regulator. So in order to overcome this issue, the regulator will have to ensure that all the criteria is fixed, and if this criteria is met by these vaccine developers, in such a scenario there will be more people who would be able to get vaccinated apart from the two vaccines that we currently have. The author further goes on to say India has set a benchmark of 5 trillion economy that it wants to meet. In case it has to meet, then people will have to come out as well. They have to work as well. They have to make sure that all sectors of the economy are concentrated upon. If people are settling and not coming out of their homes, India will not be able to meet that 5 trillion economy basis. And as a result, more vaccines will have to be provided to the people of India. So what we require is competition, choice and prices. In case we are able to take the vaccine, we would be able to develop herd immunity and ultimately the economy will recover, says the author. So going forward, what we require is a free market that makes rational sense in the Indian context, says the author. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the mains practice questions. The Biden administration's decision to end US support for Saudi Arabia's Yemen war is a step in the right direction. Discuss. Next question. Should the Indian government stay away from a free market system for COVID-19 vaccines? Critically examine. So please write all your answers on the comment section. Peer review. Come up with positive feedback. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.